Hello and welcome to Politics at Jack and Sam's Daily, brought to you by me, Jack Blanchard of Politico, still in glamorous Washington, D.C.
And by me, Sam Coates in London. You're listening on Wednesday, November the 20th, with this episode recorded a few hours earlier than normal so I can hook up with Jack before he hits the mean streets of DC for dinner.
Yeah, we're going to a Balkan restaurant tonight, Sam. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a Balkan restaurant. I'm very excited to report back on that. I will bring you all the goss when I'm back in the UK at some point on Wednesday. Here in America, obviously, all anyone wants to talk about is Donald Trump. He's just been in Texas watching a spaceship take off, because why not? If you're best friends with a spaceship tycoon, that's the kind of thing that you do, isn't it? Most fun news out of America today from a British point of view is the news that Donald Trump is coming to Scotland next year. It seems to obviously play some golf. We all know Donald Trump loves Scotland and loves golf, and he's going to be doing it again. His son Eric Trump was over there today, Sam. I say today, he was over there on Tuesday. And I feel like Donald Trump having business interests in the UK, Donald Trump still having a real affinity with the UK, that makes us an outsized thing in his orbit. And for all the sort of slight mocking of Brexiteers saying that Donald Trump wanted a trade deal in the way that Democrats don't, there is no doubt that Britain, Scotland in particular, of course, because his mother was Scottish, but Britain as a whole looms larger in Donald Trump's mind than many other presidents we have seen over recent years, for better or for worse.
I do wonder just how many presidents can name the first Minister of Scotland, but in interviews today with Eric Trump, who's up in Aberdeenshire promoting this new golf course that is being opened next year, he is having a go at John Swinney, the SNP First Minister, for his endorsement of Kamala Harris, but adding that his father isn't going to lose any sleep over the remarks. You do wonder just how much time Joe Biden spent thinking about John Swinney. Although, to be fair, he probably has a better knowledge of Northern Ireland politics, so it's just a different nation, the United Kingdom. Now, when the current US president goes abroad, the items under discussion, not things like golf, but things like nuclear war. And that is what has been on the table in Brazil at the G20 summit, where Keir Starmer and other major countries have been gathering. Jack, should we just run through, because it feels like this summit has come at a point of big and controversial escalation in the war with Ukraine. As you sit in Washington, does world events, what's going on in Ukraine, the sort of plight of Zelensky loom large in the media and in the conversation, as large as it does in the UK?
No, it really doesn't. I mean, it's surprising to me. America's moves on the Ukraine war have obviously dominated headlines in the UK and in Europe for the last few days. They have not dominated headlines here in Washington at all. I mean, people know about it, they're reporting on it, but people here are still obsessing about Donald Trump. They're obsessing about his cabinet picks. As I was saying yesterday, that is continuing. Wednesday is a very big day for that, because his Attorney General pick, Matt Gaetz, is facing this big meeting of the House Ethics Committee here, where senators will decide whether or not to release a report into his alleged misconduct. That's the kind of thing that's got people ablaze here in Washington, not the fact that the current serving president of the United States is allowing American missiles to hit Russia. That's a massive deal. Yet that's just not how this town works. You know, it all feels rather far away. It's interesting that Donald Trump himself hasn't really come out all guns blazing on what Joe Biden has done. People around Donald Trump have. One of Donald Trump's sons was on social media saying Joe Biden's trying to start World War III and suggesting this is indeed a really big and dangerous escalation. But we haven't heard Trump himself use that sort of language as yet. I think that from talking to people here who are engaged with it as a story, there is a sense of surprise that Joe Biden would do something as significant or potentially significant as this in what they see now as the lame duck period. You know, a lame duck period for president, the last couple of months when you know you're on way out, tends to be used for sort of pushing through the final bits of legislation that you almost got over the line, and then sort of gracefully tottering off into the night, not making big strategic moves on the battlefield, essentially, that could have huge repercussions for the next president. But that is what Joe Biden has decided to do. And yeah, quite what Donald Trump makes of it, we don't really know at this point.
I think it's got the events in Brazil, the G20, where Keir Starmer is just about to leave, have global resonance because of the reaction of Moscow. So the news on Tuesday is that the Russian government has lowered the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. It's changed its nuclear doctrine. And essentially what it's saying is that now if there's an assault by a non-nuclear power, like Ukraine, supported by a nuclear one, like the US, that will be considered a joint attack. In other words, Russia would be considering itself to be at war with the US in the event that US missiles are used effectively by Ukraine. So that is a very sharply increased apparent level of jeopardy. This is Moscow following through on rules that they proposed in September, but have clearly been introduced and kind of given the green light in the week that those missiles have started being used by Kyiv on Russia. So it is a moment of dramatic escalation, and it is something that Keir Starmer has been responding to in Brazil. He called it irresponsible rhetoric coming from Russia. And he said that Moscow's loosening the rules on nuclear weapons is not going to deter our support for Ukraine. We need to ensure that Ukraine has what it's needed for as long as it's needed to win this war against Vladimir Putin. And then President Macron has also weighed in, saying that China now has an important role in avoiding nuclear escalation. So this is the sort of clear and present danger that world leaders have been talking about in Rio de Janeiro. It is interesting reading kind of commentary by experts about whether this means something bad and imminent is going to happen. The consensus seems to be, first of all, that China wouldn't let Moscow do anything precipitous. China, of course, reaching out to Keir Starmer, President Xi meeting him at the start of this week. But also just that there would be no necessity for Moscow to do anything, given that Donald Trump is arriving in the White House on January the 20th and has promised a rapid negotiation to end the war in Ukraine, presumably partly in Russia's favour. So that's the context around the announcements by the Russian government today and the Russian military. But gosh, it does feel like the globe is a more dangerous place even than it was when we woke up this morning.
Yeah, I spoke to someone over here today who knows about these things, and they said that they've never known a more fluid moment for the world in their lifetime. But equally, they weren't concerned that this particular move was about to trigger off some sort of major international conflict beyond what we're already seeing for exactly the reasons that you give. We've heard a lot of saber rattling from Russia before. They've effectively made these kinds of threats before in different ways over the past couple of years. And secondly, you're right, like strategically, it would be bonkers for Vladimir Putin to try and force the issue at this point when I don't know if he's a more fair to call Donald Trump a more sympathetic president is coming in, but certainly someone who wants to cut a deal with Russia has been very clear about that. And as you say, it's going to end up being some sort of win for Putin compared to, as he would see it, compared to where they were before the invasion, you would imagine. It's also important to say, Sam, Keir Starmer himself, to bring it back to Britain, have been pushing for this for most of the year. Like Britain has made these calculations itself and decided that there isn't a major risk of escalation. That's why Keir Starmer's been asking to use the Storm Shadow missiles, or asking to the permission for them to strike Russia as well. So they could hardly suddenly then turn around and get cold feet just because the sort of things Vladimir Putin's now saying they will have factored that in when they were making these calculations earlier in the year.
But I think the events in Rio underline how global resolve when it comes to Russia is just a bit weaker than Britain would want it to be. Look, we've now had the final G20 communique, and on the section on Ukraine, it fails to highlight Russia's invasion and basically just concentrates on the humanitarian suffering in Ukraine. I think that will dismay some in the British delegation, the Sherpas, and underlines that you have a lot of countries that are just not willing to stand up to Russia in the way that Britain would want and Britain does. So the number of cards for Britain and its allies in this war are perhaps slightly fewer than you would want.
Keir Starmer now flying back from that summit in Rio, Sam, flying back overnight, and will be landing in the UK sometime Wednesday afternoon. Is this the end of the Air Miles Starmer spree that we've seen. I don't think there's another big trip on the horizon now before the end of the year that we know about. We've talked endlessly on this podcast and interestingly about all the different stuff that he's done. I feel like he's back for good for at least for a period now, as we understand it.
Yeah, ever since I drew up that list of days overseas that he's had since September, there's been a lot of conversation across different bits of the media about just how long he's been out of the country. A lot of these summits completely inescapable, and any prime minister would do it. But I'm told that there's nothing programmed for now. But I tried to get a commitment out of Downing Street people that was it till the end of the year, and they wouldn't give me one. So there's a chance of a small trip. But Brazil is a very long way away, and the consequence of that is that Keir Starmer will miss Prime Minister's questions, which means it's Deputy Prime Minister's questions on Wednesday. Now, Angela Rayner has done it several times before, and she will be in his place. But on Monday, I was telling you, Jack, that frankly, the Tories were simply saying it hadn't been decided who was going to be the replacement for Kemi Badenoch. And we have a name. It is Alex Burghart. So, do you want to just tell us everything you know about Alex Burghart?
It won't take very long. I've never heard of him. No, that's not quite true. I was vaguely aware that there was a Tory MP called Alex Burghart, but I'm sorry, Alex Burghart, I don't know a great deal about. Why don't you give us the big rundown on the big new name on the Tory front bench, who may not even be that new, but somehow has certainly escaped my attention. And I fear some of our listeners may also not be entirely across who Alex Burghart is before he appears at the dispatch box at PMQs on Wednesday.
Alex Burghart is a 47-year-old, sort of Oxford-educated, sort of urbane lawyer, bespectacled. He is effectively the shadow cabinet office minister. He's what's known as shadow Duchy of Lancaster, and he's shadow secretary of state for Northern Ireland. He's a one-time history teacher. He was a special advisor to Theresa May, and he is a sort of long-term backer of Kemi Badenoch, hoping, I think, for a pretty decent job. He ended up basically keeping the portfolio of Northern Ireland with the cabinet office bolted on, but I think this ability and being given the right and to stand in for Kemi Badenoch at Prime Minister's questions is a sort of big shiny prize for him to prove himself and see if he can propel into the front rank. He is a very, very different character to Angela Rayner. He will stand in sharp contrast to her, which is presumably the point. So it will be interesting to see whether his loyally debating skills fare well against her kind of sharp wit and bludgeoning.
There's some suggestion that we're going to see a sort of rotating approach to DPMQs from the Tories under Kemi Badenoch. Sam, have you heard that this week it might be Alex Burghart, next time Keir Starmer's away we might get somebody else? I was sort of hoping we might get a Priti Patel versus Angela Rayner match off. Priti Patel, of course, is now the shadow foreign secretary, and I thought that would be quite a fun one to watch, purely as sport, you understand. But anyway, maybe we'll get that another day. Does anybody really engage with DPMQs? I mean, I know we do, and we sort of think it's fun to watch some of these lesser known MPs duke it out at once. I can't really believe it cuts through with the public at all, really, in terms of it making a blind bit of difference to what people think about politics.
The point of Prime Minister's questions is it's a moment where the sort of PM speaks for the whole government on a range of topics, and also often in the process of sort of preparing for it makes lots of key decisions and ends up shifting policy just as he gets across the various things. That just doesn't happen when it's not him in the hot seat. So I think it's a bit of fun and a bit of kind of sport. We are watching the Tories to learn as much as we can about Kemi Badenoch's approach to running that party. She did say she wasn't going to do policy. On Tuesday, actually, she sort of reversed that, and we got a policy from Kemi Badenoch. You will have missed the farmers' protest that was all over Westminster all the way through Tuesday. Kemi has come out and said that she will reverse the inheritance tax changes that Rachel Reeves introduced in the budget, which is pretty much, as far as I can see, the first shiny announcement by the Tories. If and when the Tories get into power, if that sort of tax rise is still there, the Tories would scrap it. So we have, despite being promised that she will review absolutely everything in government, we now have a commitment from her. It was a sort of fun day out for the Tories across Westminster. Victoria Atkins was wandering around in a Union Jack waistcoat. She was showing that off to me a little bit earlier. And Kemi herself seeing Jeremy Clarkson. So I think they spy an opportunity to rebuild one bridge with one community, which was interesting. It's sort of a clear stake in the ground.
Speaking of shiny policy, the government policy announcement, the thing that government actually wants us to be talking about on Wednesday, Sam, appears to be social media. I can see in my inbox an embargoed release from the Department for Science and Technology talking about it's launching projects to explore the impact of social media on young people's well-being and mental health. I feel like that's quite a popular area for a government to try and intervene in. You know, some people don't like government intervention in things, but I sort of feel like there's a lot of parents out there who are pretty worried about the impact of mobile phones and social media in particular on their kids, and a bit of a space for government to make an intervention more than they have so far. Do you think that's where this is headed?
Yeah, I think the conversation around kids and mobile phones and teens and mobile phones has shifted really in just the space of the last 12 months. And there is a lot more media commentary and a lot more studies just suggesting that smartphones for younger children, really bad idea. Schools are starting to try and stop kids from having smartphones and access to smartphones at school. And as you say, this is an area for policy. I think what's important about what the government are doing actually is what it's not. This is not a ban. The government is not yet talking about a sort of Australian-style ban on social media for under 16s being introduced immediately. It's on the table for later, but it is not currently something that the government is looking to press the button on. So government's relationship with big tech, always under the spotlight, and there are kind of warning signs for big tech that the government could go further, but just at the moment, there is instead a kind of different set of statutory principles and other requirements that social media is going to have to sign up to, but not yet anything that matches what they're doing in Australia. Let's see whether this kind of whole approach actually does end up ratcheting up before the end of the Parliament.
And just to bring this podcast right back to where it started, in a rather joyful conclusion, to Elon Musk, the other thing being announced on Wednesday, that the Science and Technology Committee is launching an investigation, Sam, into disinformation on the internet around the summer riots in the UK. And the new chair of the committee, Chiomura, has told Playbook she wants Elon Musk himself in person before the parliamentary committee discussing that. And you have to say, while you admire the sentiment, good luck with that. But who knows? Maybe the Musk circus is coming to town to the UK next. You heard it here first, if so.
He certainly seems interested enough in Britain to justify a trip, and we would all love to have him and to watch the circus.
Right. All right, we better leave it there. Sam, I am going to go and get on a plane back to the UK in a minute, so I'm delighted to have had a short but sweet trip here. I will look forward to seeing you back in South East London on Thursday morning.
See you then. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.